This is the scary finger and petrified pepper experiment. So what you need is a scary finger. It doesn't look terribly scary right now. You need some pepper. And what you're going to need is some ground black pepper, finely ground, because you can get it sometimes ground in big lumps. And you need some washing up liquid. As you can see there, I've got a little egg cup full of washing up liquid, and you need a tray of water. Now you can see I'm using this glass baking tray. You could use a metal baking tray. You can actually use a tray that you put plates on as long as it's waterproof. You only need a very thin amount of water for this, actually, a thin layer. I've actually got quite a lot in here, but you don't need that much. As long as you've got a layer of water, you could even do it in a sink, but I quite like doing it here like this. First thing I want you to do is pick up your pepper and very lightly sprinkle it. Now you might have some pepper in a little pot. You can always just sprinkle it from the pot, that's okay. Now hopefully you can see I've just got a very, very thin layer. I haven't got loads. So just a thin layer, and as you can see, it's spread out evenly across the surface. Hopefully you can see that. Lovely. Now, one finger. First thing I'm going to do, you can do this yourselves, just touch the centre of the water. Not much happens to the pepper, though you can probably just see those lovely waves zooming out in all directions. Interesting, isn't it? By the way, this is a nice little demonstration of how sound waves travel, because they travel through the air pretty much the same as that is travelling through the water. Anyway, not much happens to the pepper, does it? So this is what I want you to do. Same digit. I want you to dip it in the washing up liquid. Get a little bit on the end of your finger. You only need a tiny bit, just a tiny bit, and go and do the same thing and see what happens. So let's see what happens for me. Hopefully the same happened for you. So I touch a bit on my finger, just a bit, remember, and touch it in the middle. So there you have the scary finger and the petrified pepper that legs it to the side. So how come your finger seemed to scare away all those tiny innocent little bits of pepper? How it works is rather interesting. On the surface of the water, even before I put the pepper in, there's a layer there. We can't see it very easily here, though if we had a little test tube or very thin glass, put some water in, look at right on the surface, it looks like a double layer. You can't see it here, but it's where the water meets the air. It forms this strange layer. And it's got a name, it's called a meniscus. Now the meniscus pulls in all directions. And it has what we call surface tension. Some people actually call it surface tension. It shouldn't be called that. That's what it actually has, what it can do. But it has surface tension properties. It pulls in all directions. Now when we sprinkled our pepper onto the water, it seemed to be floating. Now some of it actually wasn't floating in the way that you float, like if you laid back in water and just float, if you can do that. Or if you've got, say, a wooden toy brick and rested that in water, the wooden brick would float, wouldn't it? Lots of that pepper was actually resting on the surface layer itself. The surface layer was actually holding those tiny bits of pepper up, so they weren't even in the water properly, they were resting on top of it, just denting it a bit. When you get washing up liquid on your finger and touch it into the middle of the water there, washing up liquid, what it does, all the particles or molecules in washing up liquid mix in with the water molecules. Now water molecules stick to washing up liquid more easily than they stick to themselves. And by the way, water is wet because it's sticky. It sticks to things. It sticks to itself, and it can stick to washing up liquid even more effectively. So when we touch the washing up liquid on the water like that, lots of the water molecules nearby start sticking to the washing up liquid, and it means that the water molecules don't grip each other so firmly. So that surface layer, which was pulling in all directions, doesn't pull quite as hard, especially where I touched it there. But remember, where I touched it there, immediately, is just where the washing up liquid is initially, but all the water around the side didn't have any washing up liquid on it. So all the water here, the surface layer, was still pulling pretty firmly. So when I touch it here, I make it go very weak. The surface tension in the water layer went very weak, but the surface tension around the edges was still pulling pretty hard. So the weak layer here suddenly got pulled in all directions. And you actually saw it happening. It got pulled in all directions, and all the bits of pepper that were resting on that surface got pulled along with it. Now you've also noticed, I hope, that lots of the pepper is now actually sunk. which also proves to us that lots of those bits that have sunk weren't really floating in the way that you can float on water. They were just resting on that surface layer. But with that washing up liquid, which has now spread out right the way through while I've been talking, it's gone so weak. The layer is still there, it never disappears, but now it's gone very weak, and those little tiny particles of pepper that we can see now in the bottom of the tray here have just fallen through. It's not strong enough to hold them up, and that's why they sunk. So what about some things you could change to see what might happen? Well, I'm sure you can think of some things, but let me give you a couple of ideas to think about, or a few ideas. How about finding some other type of powder that you could sprinkle on some water? By the way, remember, if you try something new, you're going to have to replace this water. So you're going to have to wash that tray out, or whatever you've been using, wash it out, get all the washing up liquid out. So just pour water on it, wash it all out, and put some fresh water in, and do your new experiment. You could try different powder, different types of powder that float, and there's lots of things you could try. For example, I wonder about talcum powder, if any of you still use that. Other sorts of pepper, maybe some of the bigger lumps, some will float, and other things actually that float on the surface. I wonder what about breakfast cereal. That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Some breakfast cereal, the little particle bits of breakfast cereal, they often float. I wonder what they would do if we did this. What about using different temperature water? This water is room temperature, it's about the same temperature as around here. So how about if you use very hot water? Make sure it's not too hot for you to touch it, so you should be able to put your fingers in it, but make it as hot as you can touch it and see if that makes a difference. What about freezing cold water, of course? That'd be worth thinking about, so try some freezing cold water, and I'm sure you can think of some other things.